Welcome back to me reviewing Penny Dreadful as dictated by the tarot. Today we're going to talk about Season 1, Episode 3, Resurrection. For anyone wondering, a lot I could talk about. I'm using the tarot as a conversation starter. Yes, these are non-traditional tarot. They're Halloween themed because of the season we're in. I don't know what I'm going to do once we move past Halloween fall time. I guess I'll have to pick one of my other sets of cards. So we've got the Hermit, the Five of Bats, and Judgment. I'm really excited. I finally got a couple major arcana cards. I think too that this is like a really appropriate time for the major arcana to make its appearance. Things are really starting to ramp up in the show. Instead of getting a couple scenes and a couple hints here and there where we sort of figure out what's going on with everyone, they're kind of coming together and creating like this cohesive team. In this deck, the Hermit is depicted as a mad scientist. He's sort of like isolated and locked up in his ivory tower, and I really feel he's giving very strong like Victor Frankenstein vibes in this particular case, which is fitting because a large portion of this episode is going to be the backstory of Victor Frankenstein and his original monster, as well as like why he's even driven to sort of like seek the mysteries of life and reanimate all these corpses everywhere. One of the many reasons to love the Hermit card is because he's here on his own, kind of like seeking truth, proudly holding up his version of it, as we see in this card with the beaker, which is usually like a lamp, and the lamp is supposed to signalize truth. But in this case, it's like him working on the speaker and finally figuring out the truth using this sort of medicine, experimentation, research kind of situation, which is such a great fit for Victor Frankenstein. He has been like making these various attempts to reanimate, to figure out the solution to life, whether or not death is serene as depicted in poetry and the romantics, and whether or not we can like overcome it just as a general rule. The Hermit is one of those science over magic cards in the major arcana, where some of the others like the Magician, even like both the Emperor and the Empress have like a layer of mystery and magic attached to them. The Hermit has always been about traveling, seeking truth, kind of like one of those more logic and reasoning cards. So pulling this card in specific on a very heavy Victor Frankenstein kind of story in this episode is nice and really fitting. The other thing that's great about the Hermit is obviously he's kind of reclusive. He's on like this solitary search for self-reflection. And of all the characters, Victor Frankenstein is the most isolated. He's keeping to himself. Like, even though Ethan Chandler is staying at like the Mariners Inn or whatever, the reason he's staying there is specifically for Verona. So he is a very personable guy who immediately has these relationships, this kind of found family pack. Now that we've lost Proteus in the last episode, it's really just Frankenstein facing his firstborn creation and trying to figure out what to do with him, whether or not he can survive on his own and will ever be like allowed to go back seeking his truth, or if his knowledge base, his desires will be superseded by the needs of this one monstrous creature. And as a fun counter theory, let's imagine the Hermit is actually the original creature, Caliban the monster. He was left alone, locked up in a tower with just that one room in Frankenstein's like abandoned, fled home, viewing humanity, trying to figure them out, figure out his own place in the world. He learned to read on his own, and then he used these romantic poets as his tutors. And throughout the whole series, we're going to find that even though this creature is incredibly brutal and cruel and mean and vicious, with superhuman strength and seemingly no real need to rest and all that kind of stuff, he is also a seeker in truth and is like upholding the values of modernity and the mechanical age. He doesn't think that we'll find truth in a daffodil, as Wordsworth suggests, but that we're going to find it in smoke and steam and wire, which makes this a great card for him too. And I think it also harkens back to something that the creature said, where he compares himself and Frankenstein as the Janus mask, which is a mask that has two faces. You cannot have one without the other. It's more or less saying that Victor Frankenstein and this creature cannot be separated. They are the same being, reflecting the same truth, just with slightly different angles. And I really love that when we combine it with the Hermit, which rolls me into this 5 of bats, where we've got this prankster here blindfolded, but who has somehow managed to steal all the candy from the other trick-or-treaters. The one kid here dressed up as a cat is in the background crying, while the clown seems to be trying to comfort them. This is a card that deals with loss, which always seems appropriate for Penny Dreadful because they're always battling and losing something. But in this episode, it feels specifically relevant for both the A plot and the B plot, because when we're talking about Victor Frankenstein's story, first the bully might be Death taking his dog and then his mother's life, or the bully might be his firstborn monster that literally ripped his second-born son in half in front of him. And certainly the creature or Caliban acts as a bully and a tormentor to Victor Frankenstein throughout pretty much the entirety of this show. But we could also be talking about the mission that Vanessa Ives and Malcolm and Ethan Chandler go on, where Sir Malcolm kind of knows that they're not gonna find Mina here, and he's using Vanessa as bait to see who comes out and what's next. And even as we might see Malcolm as the bully manipulating the rest of his party, lying and holding things back, we could also see the vampire they managed to capture, Fenton, the bully, sort of taunting them, showing that he knows more about them than they know about him, and suggesting that he is there intentionally at his master's bidding and just kind of waiting on his master to talk to him. So for this show specifically, I think this is a great card, but especially this episode because we are in the arc of loss and humiliation, bullying, strong-arming, withholding things. It doesn't matter which side you're looking at, that's kind of where we are. Even Victor Frankenstein gets in on it a little bit when his firstborn creature finally tells him what he wants, and that's an immortal companion because he's lonely and he's got a face nobody could love. Victor kind of makes fun of him. That's what you want. That's what this is about. Of course no one would love or ever care about you. And the fact that I can jump and put almost all these characters into the bully situation also reinforces what Malcolm says at the end, that the reason this company is comprised of all of these people, why they've been quote-unquote chosen for this expedition, is because none of them are kind. All of which rolls me into the Judgment card. I love that season 1 is dealing with vampires, and Judgment has a vampire literally rising to face these children. And this is kind of like a card that's trying to signal you to shake yourself out of a rut or to try to do something new and different, which makes this a very interesting card because Sir Malcolm is literally trying to use Vanessa as bait to lure these vampires out instead of like hunting the vampires and perhaps using her for more insight. Also, this is when the group finally gets together to be their company of adventurers. They've committed to questioning this captured vampire, and they're also going to experiment on him to try and find a cure specifically, so if Mina has been turned, they'll be able to face that consequence or face the judgment ahead of them and maybe even save her still. Of course, if we're looking specifically at Victor Frankenstein's story again, the judgment, the chickens coming home to roost, as it were, sort of is like his first creation coming back, killing his second, kinder, gentler, more successful creation as just sort of like a vindictive, petty thing, and then demanding that he hunt down and kill someone to make a beautiful female immortal companion for him. Really, that's a lot of consequence for your action all coming at you at once. And explicitly, that creature sort of says that this is his judgment, his punishment, like sort of hearkening this card. So if we're looking at all three of these cards together as kind of like a narrative arc, I think we can see a lot of trial and experiment, both from Victor Frankenstein, possibly from the creature kind of getting his own feet and discovering himself, but even from what I would consider in this episode the B plot of like Sir Malcolm figuring out the prophecy, using Vanessa Ives as bait, and finally bringing the company together. And in some ways, the fact that this hermit is less isolated than a traditional hermit card because he's got the frog, the cat, the rat, and even the skeleton kind of all looking at him holding the lamp. This could be Sir Malcolm holding the lamp, holding the light, drawing this group together to fight the vampires, to try and figure out a cure for them, to keep the world from going into perpetual darkness, moving us into this like bullying, mean-spirited card, taking what doesn't belong to you, taunting these people. We see this most, I really feel like, from the creature himself, kind of killing Proteus, demanding things from Victor Frankenstein. But one could say the fact that Victor Frankenstein fled him to begin with, it denied him the same opportunities that he gave Proteus. It denied him a chance to be kinder and gentler and to understand what was going on. And it even in some way cheated Frankenstein out of his own first creation and what he could have learned from that particular being too. And even at the end of this episode, when all of them have come together for like the mutual purpose of potentially curing Fenton and figuring out where Nina is, we know that Malcolm is still withholding information from Vanessa Ives because she asked specifically why he used her as bait, why he thinks the vampire wants her, and he doesn't reveal the prophecy to her, actually taking Dr. Lyle's advice to not tell her. And withholding this information, withholding knowledge about how dangerous the mission is, about how he might use her in the future, or what she might need to know to defend herself, is sort of like setting the group up for this kind of failure. Which brings us over to the Judgment card, where episode 3 definitely ends us on a massive shakeup, because now everyone is gathered in one place as a company committed to themselves and their cause in a way that they have all been kind of like separate and only doing it for the money before. Sort of solidifies who they are as a group, what they're doing, and why they're doing it. So that'll be my 3 cards we used to discuss Penny Dreadful Season 1, Episode 3, Resurrection. Talk to me in those comments down below. What was your most striking takeaway from this episode? And give me a prediction on a card that would fit Episode 4. And as always, keep reading.